So, hello everyone. He's João Vitor. Welcome to another episode of LangBytes. And in today's episode, we are going to talk to Anna Koroleva. Um, Actually, we have the owner talking to Anna Koroleva. And Anna is a computational linguist. And after obtaining her degree in linguistics, she worked for a couple of years in a company developing text analytics tools. Then enrolled in a PhD program in biomedical NLP. She later returned to industry to work as a computational linguist in another text analytics company. Lately, she moved on to a company working in conversational AI and data science. Anna's main professional interests include bio-NLP, NLP for legal domain, and conversational AI. So Anna, again, thank you very much for accepting our invitation.
Thank you
And
for
we are going to
inviting me
learn a
and
lot
for
with
the
you today.
introduction. It was a very accurate one. Thank you. And yes, it's really nice to be here. I hope I will manage to share something useful for people.
Yes, you have a lot to offer. That's the thing.
I hope so.
So before we go on to the more serious questions about AI, conversational linguistics, etc., we have our random question. And this is a part where we get a little bit more personal with the guest. So your personal question or your random question is, what is your favorite movie?
Oh, that's a difficult one. I'm actually more of a theater person than of a movie person, so it would probably be more on the theater side. So I'm a big fan of musical theater, and
Oh,
actually as a consequence also of musical films as well. So all things like Disney, like old classic Disney with all the songs are great. Recordings of musicals are great, or live performances if I can get there, so all that kind of thing.
nice, nice. I love musicals as well.
They're great,
I,
aren't they? We have a
yeah,
lot of good ones back in Russia, but it's a
oh,
bit difficult
nice.
seeing them now. But I have a few recordings which save me when I miss them too much.
Yeah, it's a really beautiful experience watching musicals.
Yes. I've
Um,
always wanted to learn to sing, but unfortunately I'm quite tone deaf, so it's difficult.
yeah,
You probably wouldn't want to hear that.
that's true. So now let's move on to the more serious questions about the career, linguistics, etc. So, I saw, for example, in your LinkedIn post that you've been doing some posts about the selective process into getting into data science positions or linguistics positions in the tech industry. But can you provide an overview of the different career paths available to people in the field of computational linguistics?
Yeah, so I think probably the very first thing to say there is that actually when you're a linguist, you don't really have to go into computational linguistics
Mm,
because obviously there are also other domains that I haven't really worked in, so you can go down all the
mhm.
paths in translation or forensic linguistics. Actually, I did a little bit of that, but I left quite quickly. A lot of domains with content creation and content management. So I'm talking about computational linguistics because that's my experience, but it
Great.
doesn't mean that that's the only path. So I think it's important to note
Yeah.
that is that being a linguist, you can actually choose from a lot of paths. And talking about computational linguistics is also quite a funny thing because I think within the domain where I work, there's still quite a lot of ambiguity in the sense of what terms we use to denote our domain. So when you did the introduction, you use the term NLP, natural language processing, and there is a point of view that's the same as computational linguistics. Some people say that it's different, and anyway, it's probably a part of data science and artificial intelligence. And I think it's probably important to say that now because when I talk about roles for linguists, I think it's good to know that it's not just the role of computational linguist that you can take, it's the amount of tasks and titles that you can take is much, much higher than just one role and one title. So I would say that probably when you think about what you can do in the domain of data science, it's good to think about what data science is and what it needs. So quite often there is machine learning involved, and machine learning needs some data, which quite often needs to be labeled and good quality because if you don't have good data, you don't get good models, no matter how powerful they might be by themselves. So there are roles that aim at collecting data, and that sounds maybe easy and boring, but actually it's quite a tricky one, because if your data is not balanced, if it's, for example, over-representative of, let's say the text written by a certain population and under-representative of everybody else, it will have biases. And that's almost inevitable, but at least we need to know that, we need to try to fight it. So that's so data collection, then there's data cleaning, data preparation, data annotation. So as linguists, we can work in that, but again, it's not necessarily sitting down and labeling the text. We can also work on preparing instructions for other people, because again, to get some text annotated, you first need to understand what and why is needed, what are the difficulties, what are the problems, come up with good examples, with good explanations that have to be explanations for normal people, meaning non-linguists, people who can just read your example and understand what you want from them. And that's actually also quite a task, converting your linguistic understanding of the problem into the lay person terms. And I think there's quite a lot of companies that are appearing now, because I think people finally stopped seeing labeling as some kind of boring, low-level task and came to understand that, yeah, that's actually maybe the most important part of the whole thing. Without data, you just get nowhere. So that's the first part of the data science life cycle where we as linguists can work. And then you don't really have to stay there. You can go on to work on training the models. So that's usually the roles of data scientists. I think AI engineers is something similar, but to be honest, I don't really know the difference. It also goes to say that sometimes terms can be vague. There can be several terms for the same type of job, can be different. Yeah, it's complicated. So data scientists, AI engineers, there are machine learning engineers who also look a bit more into the infrastructure of where those models will live, how they will be monitored over time. How do you make sure that they don't just, stop corresponding to the actual data and start performing terribly? So there's those roles. And a lot of those roles include different levels of programming. So basically, there's also always a part with software development, software engineering, which can be related to NLP. But actually, once you've learned it with NLP, you can make a transition and go do software engineering in completely other domains. And I know linguists who have done that. So there's quite a lot of space for where you can transition. You can transition into computer vision if you want. Again, I know linguists who have gone down that path. There's also other roles that are probably more the classic computational linguistics type of roles. So that's, computational linguists are quite often people who program, but who also work more with texts, which can be working on rule-based systems. And rule-based systems can be used for many, many, many goals, from extracting entities. For example, you can try to write rules to extract locations, or you can write rules to find hypothetical sentences, conditional sentences in the text, and filter them from statements, and so on. So there's really a lot of things, and every single company will have different tasks and potentially different tools to solve them. So what is shared between these roles is that you will need some understanding of how language works to perform that.
Yeah.
Then there's quite an interesting set of roles about knowledge management. That's knowledge engineers, ontologists, and again, there's many job titles that I probably should not try to enumerate, because I will definitely forget half of them. So that's basically all the people who work with different data representations. So for example, at the moment, there is a big hype about ChatGPT, and you can go and ask it questions and it will tell you something. And the problem is you never know if that's correct or not. So to try to make sure that it's correct and factual, you can try to inject some structured data, which can be ontologies, knowledge graphs, and that's basically trying to describe the world in some formal way. For example, if I'm a person, then I have some parameters such as name, age, and so on. I have some connections to other concepts, such as I was born somewhere, I was born on some date, I know some other people. So that can be represented in different ways, and that's actually quite a big domain and quite a lot of jobs that that deal with all that. And that, again, is one of quite a big career path for linguists. And there's probably many, many more, but I think that's what what I remember at the moment. So again, it's never limited to what I can enumerate or to whoever can enumerate, because there's just so many different options and ways to get involved with tech roles or with non-tech roles, with language roles. So
Yeah.
it's probably impossible to give an exhaustive list.
Yeah, there are a lot of job roles, and also, as you said, they are in a scale of how much programming you have to do, right? There are
Yeah,
roles that you won't do any type of programming, and roles that your job is basically do coding and
yeah,
etc.
yeah,
So
exactly.
you can choose.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. And also you can choose and you can also change, which is also quite important, I think, because sometimes people say, yeah, I've never done programming. Can I really move towards being an NLP engineer? And yes, you can. You can learn it. Nobody was born knowing how to program.
that's true. Yeah. And now focusing a little bit more on what you do currently. Can you describe a little bit the role of a conversational AI engineer in the field of computational linguistics? And then you can focus, I think it would be nice if you focus a little bit on the engineering part and also on the conversational part, or a little bit more linguistics.
Yeah. So as you said, there's actually kind of two aspects of the role. So one is probably more classically called the conversational designer, and the other one is more the engineering side. And actually, I think when you enroll like this, what exactly you do can be quite defined quite a lot by the market, by the current requirements. So, for
Mm-hmm.
example, at the moment, I'm focused a bit more on the engineering side, I would say. So, I probably just use the example of where I am exactly right now. So the company where I work is building a tool for building chatbots, and it's using the Rasa framework. So what I do is working with the company set of code and tools and improving it and building on top of that, and that means quite a lot of writing new
Mm-hmm.
components for the original Rasa framework. So, for example, Rasa is quite a lot of chatbot tools share the same approach, that they have the natural language understanding part, the NLU, where you get the input message, you try to understand the intent, which is what
Mm-hmm.
did the user want. So you usually have a set amount of classes. You extract entities, which is, yeah, if I want to book a restaurant, what type of restaurant do I want? Where does it need to be? What's the time? And so on. So that all the parameters would be entities. Then you try to predict the next action, which is the dialect management part. So I work with both sides. So one of the biggest tasks at the moment is actually integrating the power of GPT models with the Rasa framework, because originally Rasa wasn't using GPT, and there are some limitations because of that. So obviously now everybody is aware of what ChatGPT can do. But at the same time, as I mentioned before, when you talk to ChatGPT, you're not guaranteed to get factual results. So we are trying to kind of combine the Rasa side of things and the GPT capabilities to come up with chatbots or question answering systems that can be as fluent as ChatGPT, but also factual and not just go on making up some completely wild information that was never
Yeah.
there, because ChatGPT can do that. So, and I would say that's the engineering side. So that's just writing different Python components for the tool. And the more kind of conversation design part is, that probably takes a bit less of the time, but that would be, for example, yeah, we have this tool, but then we might have a client who comes and says, okay, I have this website or this FAQ, and I want to turn it into a chatbot. And we would need to think, so yeah, how does that, how do you approach that? So obviously we want to do some things automatically, and that's why we're writing our tool set. But there is still always some amount of human intervention, some part of linguistic knowledge that you need. And for example, one of the quite current changes, which I think is quite interesting for linguists, is let's say if we're trying to create an HR chatbot, and it would be able to answer questions about what is this company culture like, or what are the benefits, or how much holidays can I have, or who do I contact if I'm aware of illegal activity, or what's the authority that I reported to in this country, and so on. So then after any of these questions, you can ask a follow-up question saying, how do I contact them, or what's their email? And the problem with it is that when you just get that single question, and let's say if you have a classic RASA framework, you must classify the intent, and you can't really do much because you don't know who you want to contact without knowing the previous context. So that's the classic co-reference resolution, but it doesn't have to be strictly co-reference. It can be just any kind of ambiguous questions like, tell me more about this. And that's quite hard to understand without having the dialogue management side. So we're actually trying to, again, bring together the capabilities of GPT models and RASA memory to be able to understand better what the user wants at each step of the dialogue. And that's quite an interesting task, because there are these kind of linguistic problems like, yeah, it's ambiguity, it's co-reference, it's all those things. But to be honest, it's problems that have been known for decades, and I think there's a lot of linguistic work and articles about them, but really there is no one way of solving co-reference or other types of ambiguity. So you have to come up with a way that is technically feasible, that will fit within the limitations of, let's say, RASA or GPT or whatever tool you're using, because there are always some limitations. No tool is all powerful. And then you actually need to make sure that it works. And then again, here comes the conversation design part, because again, RASA has some ways of dealing with it which don't necessarily involve reference resolution, that just involves trying to make probabilistic prediction of what would be the next action, given that the previous context was about, let's say, reporting illegal activity and then asking for contacts. So there are always ways of dealing with this, and you always kind of have to be aware of them, and you have to be, I think where the linguistic knowledge really comes in is trying to see these difficult points, because building a question answer system which can just handle one question at a time it's not easy, but it's a fairly common task, and there's many ways of solving it. But when you have a dialogue and you have to remember what the user said before, and you have to interpret the next questions in the context, that becomes much more fun.
Yeah.
And that's why a lot of linguistic problems start kicking in, which is quite cool. Painful.
Oh, nice. Yeah,
it's always a lot of pain when you hit these difficult linguistic tasks that are not really exactly solved, and it just becomes.
But I think that those difficult issues that we have, especially related to language, is what keeps us employed.
Yeah, exactly. No, I'm not complaining.
Because then companies look like, oh, I have this problem. The tech people can solve it, so let's hire someone who studied language.
Exactly, yeah. Exactly. And I think that's where you really bring value as linguist, is that you can actually think ahead and think, so okay, yeah, we're building a chatbot to answer questions in XYZ domain, but apart from just, taking a document and answering questions based on it, we will have problems because the user will say this type of statement and we will not be able to answer it because we can't interpret it. So you have to kind of be able to think about this user experience side, the language side, how people talk, how people behave.
Yeah.
And that's really quite important in this domain.
Yeah.
At least why it's growing, there's just so many problems that are not solved yet.
Yeah. And at least hiring linguists should be done, right? Because we know that not all of the yeah, but not all of the companies do that. So we should, we as linguists should be more, I think we should be more open and more outspoken about how we can add value to those type of products.
I was at the very beginning with my very first NLP role, I was quite lucky because the company actually had a lot of programmers, and then they hit the point when they understood that to do text analytics we need a linguist, and I was the first linguist there, and they were really at the point where they knew the value that the value that programmers bring and the value that linguists bring.
Yeah.
So I was the first one, but then there was a whole team hired after, and it was just really nice seeing that this company really knows that there is place for both, that we're not replacing each other or something
Yes.
like that, we're working together. And I think more companies are coming to that point now, but there's probably still people who think that, yeah, just get a programmer or a data scientist or a mathematician and you'll be happy forever.
Yeah.
So
And
you
that's
have
not
to
cool.
talk about it. You have to acknowledge this because, yeah, some people know it, some people still don't.
Yeah, that's true. So now moving on to the next question. We would like to know what are some of skills and qualifications that employers look for when hiring for conversational AI engineer positions, and how can someone develop those skills?
That's a good question. So I think it's a fairly young domain. Probably
Mhm.
conversational AI as a domain is younger than NLP, younger than data science, because I think chatbots a few years back were quite bad, to be honest, and
Yeah.
nobody really liked them. And now they're really much more powerful. So more and more companies are getting to the point when they want to develop this kind of tools. I think there's quite a lot of various skills, and actually, if you're a newbie to the domain and you read job descriptions, it can be quite frustrating because companies would usually ask experience with different chatbot development tools, which is Raza is one of them. That's the one that I'm working with, but there's Dialogflow, there's Amazon Lex, there's IBM Watson, and many, many, many others. So sometimes the company will want one that they have chosen. Sometimes they might want if they work in different frameworks. So that's one of kind of the key things probably for this type of roles, and it can be quite hard to get that experience if you're new to the domain. Obviously, it's a bit of a vicious circle, but I think for me personally, the kind of magic key to solve this problem was taking part in different personal projects, volunteering projects, where you can find, for example, my favorite place is Omdana, and that's
Mhm.
an AI for good platform, and they run projects where you take part as a volunteer for maybe 10, 20 hours per week, depending on how much time you can devote to it. And I did 2 changes with Raza with them. And that's basically what allowed me to get this job that requires knowledge of Raza. And that was really quite amazing in that sense, because I had no job experience in the sense of formal employment with Raza, with any chatbots. So that was really a key. But I think there's also many other things that you can and should know, and that's the general understanding of NLP concepts. So again, there's quite a lot there. But let's say if we're talking specifically about chatbots, again, there's the NLU side, which is basically text classification and entity extraction most of the time. And that's classic NLP concepts that there are different approaches, different methods. You can do that based on keywords, which is probably the first historical approach, I would think. And then there's machine learning, there's transformers, and many different things that you can use now. So it's good to know all that. It's good to have some programming skills to be able to do that. Although that actually depends. For some roles that would be more conversational design side, you might not actually need to program. You might just work
Mhm.
with, Raza or Dialogflow or whatever, and not necessarily write that much code. So it always depends. And I would say it's good to understand how, how the key parts of NLP work, what are the key parts of chatbots. And these days, probably generative AI is quite a big one. So that's all things about GPT type of models and how you interact with them. How do you do prompt engineering? And I think it really depends a lot on the company, what exactly will be asked. So in some companies, the focus might be more on the user experience side. So it can be
Mhm.
more the kind of conversation design, user experience design role, where you will need to not necessarily have the technical skills in the sense of programming or machine learning, but you will need to be able to understand the user and be able to create these workflows, implement them, work with, again, with whatever limitations the chosen tool might have. So there's really a lot of space, and it's probably quite hard because I think there's maybe 3 job titles. One is chatbot developer, which is probably more the programming one. There's conversational AI engineer, which is kind of programming, but maybe also some of the conversation design side. And then there's conversation
Uh-huh.
design, which is maybe the less technical, more language and user experience oriented. But there's a lot of diversity between these maybe 3 titles. So it's quite
Mhm.
hard to find the one that will fit your interest and your skill set. So I think the only thing that I could say here is that you just have to keep going if you want to work in this domain. Try to do side projects, try to do courses, try to do things like those volunteering projects, and then eventually they will lead you to the place where you want to be, because you will get to know what exactly you want to do, which of all these more technical and less technical sides is of interest, and eventually you will find the job that will match it.
Yeah,
It
great.
is probably a long process, to be honest. It can take a month, it can take a year, so it's not guaranteed to be fast. But
Yeah,
as long as you just keep, making little steps on the way, you will get
yeah.
where you want to be.
But any job transition, right? It can be super fast or it can be a little bit slower. So yeah.
Yeah, it also depends on the market a lot. So I think at the moment, with so many layoffs, it can be quite frustrating if you're out for a job, and obviously if you're new to
Mm-hmm.
the domain, it can be difficult. But again, things never stay bad, so there will be a day when things will change, and you might just, like, if if it's difficult to find a job right now, it just means that you have more time to learn. And
Oh,
yeah, it can be
good.
upsetting, but you will get a better job after that because you will have more knowledge.
Yeah, that's true. That's good. See the positive.
Right? Well, I'm lucky enough to be where I want to be now, but just even thinking about what the situation was maybe a year and a half ago in terms of the market, and all the companies
Mm-hmm.
were out to find, data scientists, NLP people, and so on, and now it's just turned upside down, and there's so many layoffs, and it's just, even if you don't have to be affected by a layoff in terms of being laid off yourself to be demotivated by it, right?
Yes. Yeah.
That's really
Mm-hmm.
difficult, because you
Yeah.
just see that, yeah, there's many companies that kind of seem to be struggling, or at least cutting costs, and there's many people who are on the
Mm-hmm.
market who have experience, and you have to compete with them. So I think it's psychologically difficult,
Yeah,
but
it
the
is.
situation will change, and there are still companies that hire. So
Yeah, and those
just
type of
keep going.
situations, and by that I mean the layoffs, they usually happen in companies that we think that are the dream companies.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
So when this happen, your this level of dream-like quality kind of goes down a little bit, and then you
yeah,
get frustrated.
yeah, yeah. It's all about, well, it's a bit off topic, but it's reputation of companies, how we see them. Yeah, you might think that it's, the best company you would ever want to work for, and then they get rid of thousands of people, and you might have to rethink it maybe. Or, I mean, it can be fine because, okay, there is business and things happen, so everybody takes their decision about what they want to do and what they want to think. But I think the ultimate thing is, it's not about the domain. You can still work in, AI or data science, and not necessarily be at whatever was your dream company a year ago. Or you may still aim for that if you still want it. So there's choices to be made, but the domain is still growing and still interesting.
But be careful, guys. Uh,
Yeah. Well, life is life. It's never
yeah,
smooth. So just don't take it
yes,
personally if
yes,
anything bad
yeah.
happens in your career.
So our next question is, our next question can be a little bit more sensitive, but you can, whether or not answer it, you are free to do that. So can we discuss a little bit about the salary range for conversational AI engineering? So you can talk about computational linguistics in general, and what factors impact salary in this field?
So that's quite, as you said, it's quite a sensitive topic, and I think there's a lot of reasons why it's like that. So I think one thing that I should mention is that I started my first NLP job in one country, then I moved for a PhD to another one, then I moved to another one, and now I'm in the fourth country. So that means that every time I change jobs, I usually also change the country and changed from either from industry to academia or from academia back to industry, which can be quite difficult. Because
Mm-hmm.
basically, whenever you are new to a place or to a domain or again industrial or academic jobs, you kind of lose your ground a little bit. You don't really know where you stand. You don't know how valuable you are. It
Yes,
also
that's.
applies a lot to linguists who, in my perception, linguists are technical people and it's their place to be in NLP and data science. But there will be people who will think that, yeah, you are a non-technical person transitioning to tech, and that means that your value is lower than a value of a computer science graduate. And that can be quite hard because obviously you have to understand where you are, what's your value, what's your position in this market, and what exactly can you offer. And so I would say that there's quite a bit of question about, well, there is self-confidence as one of the factors, and that's one that I know that I am liking it. I know that a lot of women are liking it. A lot of non-technical people are also struggling with that. And that
Mm-hmm.
means that when you are coming to look for a job and you ask for a salary range, you might underestimate yourself. You might name something that's below what you should really be asking for, but you might not know it just because that's the world we live in. We don't really talk about salaries much. So that's one of the factors, is just how we see ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
particularly as feeling as a non-technical person in tech. That's a really difficult one. So I think I slightly lost the chain of thought. So another one is actually the attitude of the employer. So for example, in my first job, I was really lucky to be in a company that saw the value of linguists and that really offered good salaries even for people who were new to the domain, and that was just really nice. And I knew that, yeah, I know that this employer values us. I know that they're offering salaries probably at the top end of the market, and that was just really nice knowing that.
Mm-hmm.
But you can also end up being in a place where things can be different, or you might just not know it. And I think one of the most difficult things is actually figuring out where you stand on the market, because again, in one of my previous jobs, I was a part of data science team, and my title was computational linguist, but the salary was in line with the data science team salaries. And that's nice. But even if you go to things like sites like Glassdoor, and you look for salaries for a particular location for data scientists versus computational linguists, you will usually see that computational linguist salaries are lower than data scientist ones.
Mm-hmm.
So again, the job that you do might actually be of the same value, of the same difficulty, but it's a question to the company how they see that. Do they see it as a lower role? Do they see it as an equal role? And again, you might not always know that. Uh, so I think it's really important to try to talk to people, try to use those sites like Glassdoor, try to use LinkedIn. One thing that I think is quite useful, even when you're already employed and you're happy where you are, it's good to keep an eye on just similar job postings to see if they have a salary range, see how much they offer, see where you stand, see how your skills match that job. Let's say if they offer much more money, but they have a lot of skill that you like, and that gives you a direction of where to develop, and then you can get a promotion. Or if you see that the unfortunate situation when you have all the skills and you see that all the similar jobs offer much more money, then that might be a point when you might want to go and talk to your manager. Or sometimes you might have to switch companies as well. That's all things that happen in the life. But it's
Mm-hmm.
I would say that it's still difficult because I have some experience of talking about salaries with people, and I asked people about their salaries and they asked me, and it was all fine. So it's not as scary as it seems, but it's usually a very awkward question, and people usually apologize a lot
Mm-hmm.
when they talk about it. So I would say we really need to try to stop that. We need to try to be open about it more, because if we keep thinking that it's some kind of shameful topic, it will just never change. And you will never know what you're worth. And you might just, at the end of your career, you suddenly figure out that you were underpaid all your life. And that's really not a nice thing. So I think
Mm-hmm.
talking and being open about it is really important, and trying to keep an eye on the market,
Yeah.
trying to, again, it's probably a question that we quite often ask in private, and some people are brave enough to actually go and write about it in open, which is really nice. But then again, there's also tough questions about it. Like some companies actually prohibit doing that. So
Oh yeah.
again, luckily I'm not in that position. So I'm usually not naming numbers just because I'm in the UK, you in Brazil. So it's just I have no idea about, salaries around the world can be very different.
Yeah.
But again, that's another thing that can be quite difficult because from what I see, a lot of people talk about salaries in the States for some reason. And
Mm-hmm.
salaries in the States are usually higher than they would be in, let's say, in Europe or in the UK. And it's just
Mm-hmm.
because the States is a very expensive place. So let's say maybe
Sure.
within Europe, it might be Switzerland, but it would be similar range. And in other places, it would be lower, usually, from what I know. And that's really difficult because it means that you hear about salaries in the States and you have no point of, no baseline, no comparison that you can do if you're in Europe. And it's just hard. So again, try to find a community that would talk about salaries in your location, in your domain, because that's the
Mm-hmm.
only way that you can get a
Yeah.
reasonable estimate. So I'm quite lucky there is a Russian website where programmers hang around and talk about salaries and things and salaries all over the world. So I get information from there quite a bit. And I know that it's honest. I know that
Mm-hmm.
people tell
Mm-hmm.
the truth there. But without it, I would probably have much less idea about,
Okay.
what
That's
your job
nice.
can be worth.
Yeah.
So even if we talk about the UK, and if there's any people listening who are from the UK, I think if you just look at Glassdoor, salaries for computational linguists would be something like 35K per year, which in practice can be more and can quite easily be more. So that's, I would say, rather the lower end than the medium, at least
Mm-hmm.
from what I know, from what I have seen. So you have to be brave and actually ask for more than what Glassdoor would tell you, because it's just not always representative. And the upper end depends on, again, the level of seniority. It can go over 60, 70, 90K. I've seen jobs that offer over 100K and up to the sky. But again, that's probably management level positions with more experience. And by then you probably know how much to ask for. So I think it's usually this kind of entrance level when you really don't know. So it's
Mm-hmm.
really important to go and try to find out as much information as you can. And I think
Yeah.
it's quite a classic case. I don't think it really happened that much when I was back home, but in Europe you usually ask upfront about what's your salary expectations. And that's really difficult because at this point you usually don't know what the job is offering.
Yeah.
So you don't want to say, to name a range that's too high in case they don't continue interviewing you. But if you name a range that's too low, then you're at risk of getting lower than you're worth. So it's difficult, and I think there's a lot of kind of good and bad behaviors about it in recruitment. So some companies are good, some companies are upfront and straight and value people, and some will try to lowball you. So it's the reality. And it
Yeah.
can be hard to know which one is which one as well, because they will probably all look nice enough, unfortunately.
Yeah. I also think there is something about remote working and the currency. Because, for example, now with remote working, I can work to a company from London,
Yeah,
but when you convert um, the
yeah, the
British
currency
currency
rate.
to the Brazilian one, I have much more money with the Brazilian currency than if I went to London and live there and pay with the British currency.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's quite a big topic as well, and I've seen a lot of discussions about it actually in the States again. For some reason, they're very vocal. And the question was, okay, let's say you had a company in California, and it's the most expensive place in the States, and then during COVID, people moved away, but someone stayed and someone moved to a cheaper place. So do you pay less to the one who moved? Do you still pay the same?
Uh,
They still bring equal value to the company. So it feels like you should pay the same. But at the same time, if you think about it from the point of view of the person who stayed, the person who is in California, maybe because their family is there, maybe they just have to be there for whatever reason. They can afford a way of life that is probably less lucrative than the person who moved to a cheaper place. So from their point of view, it becomes unfair. And I think
Yeah,
it's a really difficult one. I don't know what's the right and wrong answer. So it's just a really difficult topic, I think. And there are kind of pros and cons for paying everyone equal or having a pay based on the location. And I really don't know what's better. And yeah, I think that's also a thing to think about when you're looking for jobs, when you're agreeing for jobs, is thinking about, okay, so where do I have to be? Do I have to, move to London? And maybe it's a high salary, but also everything is twice more expensive than where I am now. So I will end up having the same money in the end. And potentially, maybe I don't want to live in a big city. Just as an example. I don't mind big cities, but So there's always these kind of questions and considerations. And I personally like remote working, and again, for me, there is also limitations of visas. So let's say I might want to go and live in another country and continue working remotely for the UK, but I need to solve the questions of visas and work permits.
Yeah.
And I think quite a lot of people are in the same position. So you don't always have the freedom of choice, but it's a good thing to think about is, let's say you get a remote job, what can you do with it? Where can you go? Where do you want to go? And hopefully we can all find the place where we want to be. But it's all not easy. Because then you might also hit a place when, maybe you have a great salary in terms of UK or France, but maybe you want to live in Switzerland and you just won't be able to afford that. So there's always these kind of questions.
Yeah.
You can't you can't go to a more expensive country, I'm afraid, with a remote job.
Yeah, that's true. So now we are moving on to our last question. So I would like to know that what advice do you have for people who are just starting out in their career in computational linguistics or conversational AI engineering, and how can they position themselves for success? Or if you want to focus on academia, if you like, because I know that you're a PhD graduate, and congratulations for that. You can also focus how people can prepare themselves for a PhD in NLP or etc.
So I think probably the biggest advice is a very kind of silly, stupid, common one, but the advice is to not give up, because the market can be tough now. And also, no matter the time, if you're a linguist or if you're just a newbie to the domain, if you're looking for your first job, you will always come across people who will be, condescending and humiliating, and you will have bad interview experiences where people will treat you like you're nothing there and I'm the god, so why am I even talking to you? And that's just, they're nasty people. It just happens. I know linguists and non-linguists who had that experience in interviews and just in general in their work life. And that's just something that has nothing to do with you. It's just, if a company has people like that, you don't want to work for them. So just forget it and move on, and don't get upset. Don't let it bring you down. And one thing that I like to tell is that now with all these layoffs, the market looks bad. But when I had my first non-NLP job and I was looking to change jobs, there would be maybe one NLP job in half a year or a year, because it was just really a very small domain at that point in that place. Yet now it's grown a lot. Now every major company has an NLP department. So things change. But when things change, there will be moments that look good, there will be moments that look bad. So maybe you'll land your first job in a month and it will be a dream. Maybe you will get a job, but it will be toxic. Maybe you will spend half a year to a year looking for a job and maybe doing, something that maybe you enjoy less. And that's all just fine. It all happens. It doesn't always depend on you. So I think to get to success, it's really important to find your best way of learning, because, for example, there are a lot of online courses, a lot of online platforms, and you can choose all kinds of formats, from reading to videos, exercises, whatever. But I know that for me personally, it's practical projects like the ones that really give me the most experience and also the most confidence. And that's where, if you want to practice a skill that maybe you learned in courses, that's really a place to be able to apply it in practice and get yourself more ready for jobs. But again, that works for me. There are people who don't necessarily like that kind of thing. So, and then you can do your personal projects. You can find a topic that you really like and just implement it and, put it up on your GitHub, for example. So there's many different ways, and there's no right or wrong. Again, so people will say, yeah, you have to have the coolest GitHub ever to get a job, which is not always the case. You have to find your way of learning and showing your experience, which can be anything, can be blogs, can be your LinkedIn posts, can be your YouTube channel, can be whatever. So yeah, it's important to find your way or keep looking, because again, we can all change our decisions, and not give up and look for the best way of learning that you have. And I think it's quite similar with industry and academia. So to be honest, when I went to academia to do a PhD, I did it mainly to just get more employable abroad, because sometimes if you have a degree from a country, it can be valuable within the country, but getting employed abroad can be a different question. So for me, it was just a way to, go and see the world a little bit and be able to find jobs in different places. So I did enjoy it, but also I'm more of an industry person, and I kind of knew that I would get back to industry eventually. But again, it's a choice that you can make. You can go to industry, you can go to academia, you can swap between them. There are professors with 20 years experience in academia who go to industry because they just want to change. There are people who come back to academia from industry because they have the desire to teach people. So I think the key point again is that whatever you are valuable as you are. It's a very important skill to be able to see your worth, and whatever experience you have to understand why it's good. Because yeah, if you've always worked in industry and you never taught anyone, you probably mentored people. Even if it wasn't formal mentoring, you worked with someone, you explained something to people. And you can apply that in academia if you want to teach. Or if you worked in academia, you were managing your project, you were writing your code, you were keeping up to your deadline, potentially managing stakeholders and so on. So again, that's all skills that also apply in industry. But quite often people just don't see it. So think, yeah, I'm a PhD student or a researcher. I have no idea about what do I do in industry. And they can't, well, I don't like the word, the phrase sell themselves, but it is selling themselves during the job search. They can't do that. And well, to be honest, I'm not grateful at myself. I know that quite often I just don't manage to explain my skills well enough. So it's really a learning process that is probably lifelong unless you're really great at this. But whatever you've done before, whatever domain you were in before, you always have some value, you have something to bring, and it's important to try to find that.
Great.
And there's a few people that I follow on LinkedIn who's done different career transitions, and I quite like reading them, because when you read examples, you kind of get a better idea of your own worth, of applying your own set of skills to whatever other domain you might want. And I would say that that's a really good way of learning to find an example of someone maybe similar or related to your profile.
It's good to see what options are available, right?
The world is big. The world is much bigger than we think.
Yeah, that's true.
Again, there was a time when I was just using maybe one keyword in job search, and it kind of led me to where I wanted to be, but I could have used much more options, and I could have been on a different career path, but I might have been happy there as well. So you can be a linguist, you can go into data science, data analytics. Actually, one that I forgot to mention before is analytics is a big domain for linguists as well. And you might just end up being happy there. So it's not about the title. It's not about, whatever's on your CV. It's about loving what you do.
That's true. So that's the end, Anna. So thank you very much. It was a lovely conversation.
It was enjoyable.
And I'm sure those who are watching could get a lot of good tips from you today. I got some good tips. So
I hope so.
I hope they could get that as well. And everybody, I'm leaving some links that Anna sent me in the video description. So I think she has some high value LinkedIn posts that you could look at it and then read it, and then, as she said, adapt it to your own situation, your own context. And that's it. So Anna, again, thank you very much for accepting the
Thank you.
invitation.
It was really enjoyable. Thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome. And I hope we can get in touch soon to chat a little bit
Definitely.
more. Okay.
Definitely.
So
Thank
thank you
you.
guys.
And
Bye-bye.
good luck with the channel.
Thank you.